Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams Burch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Welcome to a very special Doctor Is In episode. This is not just yours truly speaking as a doctor, but I brought in two awesome other doctors who teach music methods classes as well. Why? Because today the doctors are in and we're answering questions from first-year teachers. Now, before you turn it off, if you're not a first-year teacher or second or third, this episode is still for you because we talk about some things that you probably should reflect on and at least laugh about as you reminisce on your first years. If you're in your first years, we hope that this gives you encouragement and ideas. We want you to know that it is normal to feel like you feel right now, and we have your back. If you need us, all the contact information is in the notes. I'm just really glad you're listening. That's the first step. You're pouring into your cup as you pour out into those students in front of you. It is such a joy to bring you these episodes, and I'm really thankful to the Kennison Choral Company for being a sponsor of the podcast. All right, without further ado, I present to you The Doctors Are In, questions from first-year teachers. Welcome to The Doctors Are In. This very special Doctors In episode features not one, not two, but three doctors. This is Emmy, or Dr. Burch.
I'm Amy Kotsonis. Dr. K is what most of my students call me because Kotsonis is, a big last name. And I teach at the University of Northern Iowa, and I am technically associate professor of choral ensembles and music education. I conduct two of our choirs at UNI, and I also teach choral methods, conducting, introduction to music education, and I observe field experience and student teachers.
Wonderful. Fabulous. Dr. K, it's great to have you.
I'm Dr. Erynn Millard. I work at the Minnesota State University Moorhead in northern Minnesota. I have the opportunity to work with three choirs. I have a university choir and a concert choir. Next year, my pop a cappella group is going to be one of my curricular choirs, so I'm excited about that. And then I have the opportunity to wear a lot of hats. I work with elementary music methods, secondary music methods, diction. I supervise student teachers. I taught a voice class recently, and now I teach the whole conducting sequence. So I get to do a lot of things and meet a lot of people. And today I'm excited to be here with the two of you.
I am so thrilled that there are three female people that are all teaching very similar classes at the University of South Carolina in Aiken. I teach elementary methods, secondary methods for band and choir, and introduction to music education, along with supervising all the practicums and all the student teaching. So I think it's fun having one leg in the School of Ed and one leg in the Department of Music. That's been a really fun juggling act, learning how to walk that. But I'm excited to talk about some of these questions with you. I've been polling first-year teachers, anyone from their first week to their full first year, and asking what they wish they would have known in their methods classes. So for people listening, this episode is designed to just get your brain moving, thinking about either remembering your methods classes or a refresher, or if you're one of those first-year teachers, we are here to tell you it's okay. And you're going to survive. So before we dive into the questions, let's start with Dr. K. How do you organize your classes in general? What are some of your big objectives you hope your students walk away with?
I think for me, I have different goals. So like choral methods, for instance, which I'm teaching this semester, I have some goals of they're running rehearsals. And so I want them to feel comfortable on their feet, working with repertoire. And I find that with my students, some of their biggest deficits or they're most uneasy about working with younger singers, because they could walk into a high school rehearsal and be fine because that's their most recent experience. But when it comes to breaking things down and working with less experienced singers, or maybe singers that don't have the music literacy, they don't know where to start. And so that's one of my goals, is for them to feel comfortable with all age groups in that rehearsal process. In addition, we do a lot of discussion and reading about teacher identity and what are the different hats that, as Erynn was saying, the hats that she wears. You wear a lot of different hats as a public school teacher between, the directing of the choirs, all the administration, whatever else you're teaching. And there's so many things to think about. And one of the things that I come back to very often is that regardless of what I'm doing, whether it's programming repertoire or, designing my classroom, our students need to see themselves in everything that we do. And our values need to be apparent in everything that we do. And so there's always something in the back of your mind kind of directing things and being able to evaluate. So those are some of my big goals of just and thinking about what students are bringing to the table, and that not every student is the same and not every student has the same experiences. And one of the other things, I keep using the word less experienced, never use the word weak. When you're talking about students or singers, it just means they're less experienced. They haven't had some of maybe the opportunities or teaching that other students have.
Excellent. I love that. What about you, Dr. Millard?
Same. I'm going to jump on Amy's boat about less experienced. And I characterize it just the same way, that everybody's in a different place on their musical journey. And so I think when organizing my classes, the thing that I come back to the most often is really just organizing the steps and the pedagogy of it. Because as we're walking this journey of our own musical education, and everybody's journey is different, you have this path in front of you, and if the pedagogy is right, then it feels like you have a good map of where it is you're headed. So for example, for the elementary methods classes, and Emmy, I know we've talked about this before, I organize it around all of the parts of the lesson plan. So first we learn about objectives, because that's at the top of the page. And then we talk about our materials and setting up our spaces so that it doesn't manage you. We talk about our procedure, and we talk about task analysis and making sure that your instructions are clear and concise. And sometimes you can have a great lesson that's totally torpedoed by the fact that you don't kind of lay it out exactly the right way. And we talk about the assessment, and does it come back through your original objective and what your procedure was for the day. At the secondary level, I think of it in the same way. I break things up into small pieces and calendar them all out, so I am not stressed for time at the end and in this panic mode of we have to get this done, we have to get this done. And it also keeps me from over programming and keeps then students from over programming. So I like to organize things, and I think that's the thing I come back to the most often, is making sure that my materials are organized in a way that the journey feels right and you don't feel like you're getting lost in it.
I love it. It is a journey. And I want to just connect with two things. You each said something that's so perfect. The less experience and that journey, because I think it's our job as methods teachers. We cannot possibly teach every single one of the things that you are going to need. We are still learning every day as it is with our ensembles and everything that we're teaching. Teaching is one of those fabulous careers you get to continually grow, and that's why they have professional development. But I think the important part is teaching them how to think and how to problem solve. So often, and I love the organizational structure of both of your all's courses, knowing how to get the students thinking, okay, if I get in this situation, how do I get to A, B, C, D? Or as Dr. Madsen always says, thinking 3 steps ahead. Well, if you've never encountered this type of student before or this type of classroom before, how do you know what the 3 steps ahead could look like? So training our students' minds to think not just what we're teaching them in the classes, but the beyond. And I think that is the perfect segue into some of these questions. You don't have to have a favorite, but do you have a favorite class that you teach?
I think mine's probably a tie. I just started teaching the intro class this year. So I'm only in my second semester of teaching it, but I have really enjoyed it. I have stolen ideas from pretty much everybody I know that teaches that course elsewhere, and gotten some great articles and ideas. I'm also a huge fan of having guest speakers. It really amplified because of COVID last spring, but I was able to keep all of that this spring. We can't be experts in everything. And so bringing in specialists for different areas. So for instance, Iowa was a big show choir state, but not all of my students have experience with show choir, but we have amazing high school teachers that are running multiple show choirs at their schools that will lend themselves for 50 minutes to speak to my class and just share everything they have and all their resources. And we do separate teacher panels. We do you're in your first 5 years, talk to us about that. And then also some of our alumni and making those connections. And I've done that with both of the intro class and my choral methods. But I think that seeing seeing the lights go on. And in the intro class, it's very much about starting to think of yourself as the teacher and no longer the student, and that teacher identity and what does that mean. And then the choral methods, you're finally in the class for what you're going to be doing, has been exciting. And I've learned so much. I keep tweaking every semester. I'm in year 7 of doing choral methods. I totally reorganized the steps in my syllabus this year that I feel like it works better and builds better, where we're starting with the younger and then we're going to kind of build up to the other. And the other thing that it made me think of it when you talked about this, Emmy, thinking ahead with lesson plans, my students probably hate me for it, but as they're writing out, they write out their 1, 2, 3s. We do the direct instruction. So they actually come up with multiple possibilities for what happens. And then they have to come up with a solution for every single thing. So it's, you know, they have to write 2 to 3 2s and then at least 3 3s. And then the next step is, if they got it, this is what I can do at that point. But they're thinking through, if they mess up the pitch or they mess up the rhythm, here's what I can do. So hopefully they're not frozen on the spot. If something doesn't go according to plan, they've already thought through some of the things that might happen.
Right. That's an excellent kind of role playing scenario where they have to really think and stretch their brain. If you are listening and you don't know the direct instruction model or the teaching cycle or whatever you'd like to label it, it's just an amazing amount of research. But the 1 is teacher talk, the 2 is student performance or student whatever, and the 3 is the feedback. And the idea being that 3 should relate back to 1 in a positive and tangible way. So it can go 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, or if you have little bitties, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. So that's a whole nother great conversation. I'm glad you brought that up. What about you, Erynn? What's your favorite class to teach? So specific.
It's got, I feel like I teach so many things. It's kind of hard to decide. This semester, for the first time, I'm teaching basic conducting. I lost not lost him. He went on to a new opportunity, the colleague that I had last year that used to teach our conducting sequence. And I am enjoying watching the students. It's very much like Amy said in the methods classes, that you find that moment where they're going from being the student to being the teacher, to being the adult in the room and making the decisions. And I have always watched it that way, but in conducting it, I'm watching that again and I enjoy it. And I'm watching it in a different way of seeing them, go from this tentativeness in their gesture to finding themselves and knowing exactly what it takes to get a response out of somebody. And selfishly, I'm kind of also enjoying the deep dive back into my own conducting again. So aside from that, I really have enjoyed, which shocked me, elementary. I've enjoyed teaching elementary methods. I started taking my Kodai levels, and the third one I haven't got to take because of COVID, but in the first 2, I feel like those more than anything really led me down the road of confronting a lot of anti-racism in my classes, and that really has changed the way that I have enjoyed that deep dive and transforming what I'm doing in them. That particular one led me to look at the repertoire that I was using and start thinking in the deepest way that I ever have about even just the pedagogy that I use and not just the repertoire. So I kind of appreciate teaching that class for a lot of different reasons. I think it transformed what I'm teaching to my students and transformed the way that I am really seeing things. So I have unexpectedly enjoyed elementary methods with the least amount of experience there.
That is my favorite class.
Yeah?
That is the perfect segue there. It is my all-time favorite because so many come in saying, oh, I'm going to teach high school. I'm going to teach high school. And then they fall madly in love with elementary and they're like, wait a second, I kind of like this. And they're really good at it. But I also love the whole scaffolding. We've already talked about scaffolding and building, but if you can teach something to a kindergartner, you can teach it to a 50-year-old. It's knowing those nesting dolls, how to unnest them and renest them, how to undo your 1 2 3s and when to do just 1 2 1 2 1 2 2 2 2 2 1 2 1 2 3. Occasionally, drop of the hat. So I think this is fun to hear. So we're all coming from different perspectives. Now, listeners, they don't know what I'm about to tell them. This is research I've been compiling from first-year teachers. So I wanted you to hear the reactions because some of these statements are very fascinating. So I basically asked some early teachers, What have you learned in your first days on the job, or first weeks, or first years? What do you wish you would have known coming in? And there were a lot of recurring themes. So perfectionism is something that needs to be torn down. A lot of these first year teachers talked about how their first year goal ended up becoming survival instead of the big lofty, I'm the best teacher on the planet. I see y'all nodding and laughing. Can we talk about expectations and setting up expectations to remove stress from that first year? What are some things that you would share with the listener on that one?
I have this really awkward thing I say to students, and they laugh at me a lot. And I will say, your only job your first year is to don't quit and don't get fired. And they all laugh at me because they think that they're going to, I'm going to accomplish great things and I'm going to go do the same thing that I had at my high school. And yeah, that's going to be part of your journey. I just don't think it's going to be your first year. And maybe I'm wrong. And then they kind of get out there and they're like, okay, that was some real talk that you shared. And I think it's because they are shocked at what they go through on a daily basis and how much that kind of weighs on them and the number of days they do feel like they want to walk away, and so just get through. The only thing you need to do your first year is don't quit. You can do it. The next year will be better. You'll have a better idea of what's going on.
I think that's also totally pertinent for right now. COVID teachers, don't get fired and don't quit. Just keep showing up. The kids need you. Sorry to interrupt. Dr. K, tell us your things, your thoughts.
I think that what's hard for students is they've been in classrooms their entire lives. And they have had a myriad of teachers, and they've had teachers that maybe were stronger or more involved than others, but they've seen it happen so much. But that's different than doing it yourself. And so I think they set themselves up for expecting, I should be the same as this person that's been teaching for 20 years. And that's just not realistic. One of the things I talk with my students in all of my classes and ensembles, we talk about giving grace to ourselves the same way we would to somebody else, which I don't think any of us are good at. And I think that sometimes that reminder of, okay, if this was your friend, what grace would you give them? Well, I would. Okay, so why aren't you doing that for yourself? And so I think just that reminder that you should not be perfect. I reflect on my first few years teaching, and, I absolutely cringe on some of the things I programmed, or, my, like, that was probably not the most realistic piece to do, or the way that I taught some things was not the most efficient or effective. Or, I remember we had one choir that was huge. We had 3 teachers because there were so many kids in there. But there was one day where they just were so chatty and I totally lost it. And I was like, but my students don't know that. They see me now so many decades into teaching where I've learned a lot, and also gone through a lot of schooling to help.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked with amazing teachers, and I, steal from everybody I know. And so I didn't start out this way. And I also, I'm in a position, I taught high school was my first job. But my second job was teaching middle school. And honestly, if that had been my first job, I would not be here. It was such a challenging situation. And I taught high school in Brooklyn. So I'm like, I got it. Like, let's go. And then I go teach this middle school in Boston. And it was so tough for so many reasons. And really, I had to dig deep, and I had to, reach out for things and do professional development and figure out, how am I going to do things with these kids? And it was so challenging and frustrating that I absolutely thought about walking away, but I'd had a great job before. And I tell this to my students all the time. It's not necessarily the profession. It might be the job. And that's a really important distinction, because I've had both. I've had a position that I loved walking in every day, and I had a position that I was like, I just got to make it through the year, and you can do anything for a year. I think that's important. And I've had several students that have gotten positions that maybe is not going to be their forever home. And they've said, I remember you saying it's not necessarily the profession, it might be the job. And so I think sometimes we're in different experiences and we're in different positions. Some teachers have challenges that others just don't have. And so it's really important to remember the reasons why you got into this, the fun stuff about the job, but also that maybe this just isn't the best fit for you. And maybe there's something wonderful. And take Erynn's advice and don't quit and don't get fired, so that you can get this other job that might be a better fit.
Yes.
You'll be totally marketable in a different sort of way after you have a year or two under your belt that you didn't quit and didn't get fired than you were when you first walked out of your program.
Yeah.
I was
Goes to
all
a different
survival.
one.
I remember I was in middle school. I started a middle school job. Survival, and don't cry in front of the kids. I remember there was one day I was at the bus stop and I'm like, do not you dare. I felt it coming. I'm like, you're not going to cry in front of these kids. You're gonna. I got all the way to my car and I shut the door and I just lost all the tears. It only happened twice, but I didn't cry in front of the kids. And the tears weren't necessarily like bad. It just was frustrating not knowing how to be the best version of my teacher self that I had put myself on a pedestal for. But stealing a quote from Rachel Hollis, don't compare your beginning to anyone else's middle or end, because you don't know what they've been through or what they've done to get to where they are. Just keep showing up. Oh, these are good.
Hello, I'm Charlie.
And I'm Carrie.
And we're the husband and wife team behind Kinnison Choral Company.
We know firsthand the life-changing effects a great choral performance can have on a director, singer, or audience member. We also understand the time it takes to rehearse the notes, words, and rhythms in order to reach that high level of artistry.
Your singers should be able to go home and rehearse the foundation of their music in confidence with the sounds of a real choir. We want you to have the joy of making music, not teaching notes.
With our choral rehearsal tracks, the most comprehensive in the industry, your singers will have 5 different track styles to rehearse with in the comfort of their own homes.
Empower your singers by giving them the responsibility they yearn for. Stop teaching notes in rehearsal and start teaching life.
And just for listening to this podcast, we're giving you a special offer. Use coupon code MUSICMATTERS at checkout for 20% off your first song from our library. Again, that's Music Matters, MUSICMATTERS, for 20% off your first song from our library.
And never forget, the world needs your voice.
It's so much fun talking to y'all about this. Okay, so one of them said, I'm working on making goals that are more tangible, such as small goals, like just showing up and getting them to open their mouths. I also need to start engaging them in rhythm reading and sight reading so they at least have some type of routine, but they don't even like my music. So anyway, back to goals. This is all I'm just transcribing. Back to goals. I'm making small steps and small goals. What small steps or small goals would you recommend as someone who's walking in? You want them to don't quit, make it. What are some small goals they can feel like they achieved?
I think the first thing that they said, that they're just showing up to work every day and getting them to try to make some sound. That's not a small goal. I taught a middle school for a little while too. And I remember feeling like my new job was begging people to sing. And so that's not a small goal at all. That is an absolutely worthy goal. And you shouldn't, I would tell you not to dismiss that out of hand, like that wasn't a worthy way to spend your time. With regard to trying to find the music that they like, gosh, that can be a real landmine too, because you put the things out there that you like and they're not really interested in it. And sometimes if you put things out there that they already know, like a song that they've requested to do, the real challenge with that is that you need to present it in a way that it can be a group of people can do it rather than one person, and that can be a frustrating experience with them too. So maybe it's someplace in the middle. Maybe it's a style that feels more familiar to them rather than a specific song. Maybe they're warm-ups or activities that you engage in every day, rather than feeling like the first thing you need to do is put a piece of repertoire in their hands and, okay, we need to learn a song. So maybe the smaller bite, the part of the journey, the step that goes in between those bigger steps is warm-ups or an activity or a game or something that they respond to. Maybe it works that way. And again, every school and every class is going to be different. So figuring out what that is for the young people in front of you.
Yeah, I think that every class, even if I'm teaching the same class, the same course, every class is different. And so I really probably would modify my goals to that. And so this has been coming up actually in my classes and a couple of guest lectures recently. We were talking about repertoire yesterday in my choral methods class, and some of the conversations that we had, pop music's bad. You're not supposed to sing pop music, and people have this mentality, and it's like, well, what's wrong with it? And also there's some pop musicians that do things that classical musicians do not have the skill set for. And I think that there's a lot to unpack there, which we're going to disregard for the moment. But I think
another time, we're having this again another time. It's a great conversation.
We come out of college, which is not reality, right?
No.
Our ensembles are not reality. The music we're doing is not reality. And we've been surrounded by this, and the musicianship is not reality. No. And all of a sudden you go into teaching and your kids don't read music. They maybe, don't even know what a treble clef is. That happened to me when I was teaching sixth graders. And I was like, who was your elementary teacher? Come on. But, we don't know where they're at. And so we have to go from the known to the unknown. And if me picking a pop piece or me saying, we're doing this concert, you all get to vote on one piece that you're invested in. Here are the parameters to pick, but this is your song that you get to pick and do that. Sometimes that'll be a way, a gateway. So I love Jim Papoulis's music. He's fantastic. And he's also a fantastic human. I have never met a kid that didn't like his music. And so I consider Jim's music to be a gateway, because if you listen to it, it's kind of got some rhythms and kind of a pop feel, always great, meaningful text. But that often can be a way that if especially, you never know what you're walking into. And so if the predecessor had been doing only pop songs or only, sing along to a CD, and all of a sudden you come in
your lyric sheets.
Yeah.
No, not just in the lyric sheets. There's a time and a place for everything.
As long as that's not all you do.
Yes, that can't be all of it.
And so it's like, if that's what they're used to is pop music, then you can get them. But if I all of a sudden walk in with some arrangement of some Brahms folk song, like, they're not going to jump into that. But if I give them some other things that they can immediately latch onto and then sneak that in there, then you could eventually kind of move things over. So I think there are things that are frowned upon when you're in the classical Western, history world, that it's like, you got to survive and you got to do this. And so figure out whatever way that makes it happen. When I was teaching middle school, I had a lot of general music classes as well. And literally one of the reasons my job was so challenging is that the previous teacher, I taught in the auditorium. I didn't have a music room. The previous teacher did football and kickball during music class. So my eighth graders had 2 years of not doing music. And so the fact that I actually wanted to teach them music was like, so the classroom management behavior was like nothing I had experienced. And I was like, I have to do something. And so I was able to get a really small grant to get some percussion instruments. And so I got like one djembe, one set of bongos, a bunch of rhythm sticks, and some whatever. And we learned rhythms. And those kids were reading, but they loved playing drums. And if they didn't behave, they couldn't play. But on the days of some of my most challenging students, when they were really doing a good job, it's like, you get the djembe today, because that's what they really wanted. And so that worked well. But I was absolutely like, what can I do?
What do you do? They were playing kickball. Geez Louise. Although I do have a really fun game of like rhythm baseball that we played on Fun Fridays occasionally. Something else you said sparked a little memory too. We're surrounded in this, not real world of college life, where, here's a great one, we've all chosen this career. The people in your classes love music, and they chose to take music classes, so much so they majored in it. And here you are being plopped down in the middle of whatever program, and the kids might not even have chosen to be in your class. And to think like someone who doesn't love music is such a challenge, even to this day. These are all great things to reevaluate your expectations and make small goals.
Can I toss two more on there?
Yeah, please do, yes.
The first thing is, that's something that I say to usually my concert choir, my most advanced choir, is for those of you that are music ed majors, please understand this is not your real life. I don't know at what point in your career this will happen to you, but understand that your real life is not going to, this is for you, and this is to feed your soul. So just trying to manage expectations that way. And then the other thing about, kind of switching gears from leaving your college education and going to your middle school job is little things are really important. I remember wishing that I could put the fact that we stood on the risers and stood still and didn't talk to each other, felt like that should be something I should be able to put on the program. And
Huge. We
also,
walked on the risers. Huge.
if you think I haven't taken a round that we just did as a warm up and made it into a concert song, you would be wrong, because that's
Yes.
what we were, and that's what we're capable of today, and we're going to be proud of it.
That is so, and those are good things that are in your control, and finding those things that you can measure. So getting them practicing how to get on and off the risers and celebrating those things, looping back to the 1-2-3 model, giving them that praise, teaching them what you are praising them for, and having the grit to endure the rapport building that comes with it. So there were a few statements from these first year teachers that I absolutely love. And some, they said, can you just tell me this a few more times? Like, you can continue to get better, or this is normal. I'm nervous every day. Why are these things so terrifying? Is it supposed to be this terrifying? It would be easier if the things I'm trying to figure out were related to singing. What are some tips or some one-liners? That's my favorite. What are some tips and some one-liners that you could give to someone who's, oh my gosh, I'm in front of a computer all day, I'm over COVID. This is not normal. Or is this going to ever get better, whether you're a first-year teacher or in your 30th year? What are some tips you can encourage them with? Maybe help them re-establish their yardstick of measurement.
I think that, so from my own experience with, especially with COVID, so much just has to go out the window. Our priorities have to change. And I honestly think our priorities need to shift more towards our students. And not that we're not caring about them, but like, we have to care about them more as humans right now than we really do about their skill set or where they are in our curriculum or where they're supposed to be, because everybody's surviving. And with our students in general, we often have any clue what's happening at home or what things they may be going through or dealing with, unless they happen to share with us. And so I think giving our students grace and giving ourselves grace, with my ensembles. So my community chorus that I have has been Zoom since last fall. And that's what we do. And it's not great. And they really don't get to hear each other sing because there's no way to do that with the lag time. But we get to see everybody's face. And even just that connection with people is really important. And actually, as a side result, I've been doing a lot more technique, and we've been doing solfege and things that I never take time to do when I'm working on a concert program. And I've had so much positive feedback from that I'm like, oh, I need to be making this a priority in my weekly rehearsals. And I will also say it was hard for me with my ensembles. We literally were doing 2 or 3 songs for the entire fall semester. And I'm normally doing 7 or 8 per concert and having at least 2 concerts. And so I had to let go of that, of my expectations. I mean, I was feeling like a terrible teacher and educator that this is all my students were getting. But because we were very lucky that we are singing face to face, but I'm seeing 12 kids at a time because we have to be spaced out. And we were literally rehearsing in the lobby of our performing arts center with people coming and going. The kids can't hear each other. So our progress was so much slower than we're used to. And you don't have that connection. Your neighbor's not next to you to talk to in between songs, or when your parts I work with a lot of underclassmen in my choirs. I basically get all of the freshmen, and then I also work with upperclassmen. And so trying to make them feel like they were part of something. So I actually found that, the music part is important, but so much of the social interaction, and we tried to do team building and things like that, was almost more important right now. And so I think you just can't have the same expectations. And it's really hard because when you talk about comparing, you're seeing these people that are making these amazing virtual choirs, which, do you know how many hours that takes to do that? And we're not trained in that. Or you see people that are living in a different state than you that are allowed to sing with masks, with everybody 6 feet apart, and they see their entire choir every day. And that's not my reality. And they're able to do things because of their situation. And it's like it's really not fair to anybody to compare right now, because we're all facing a lot of uphill battles. But I think and that goes with, you know, being nervous in front of a class. You have to talk to yourself a lot and talk yourself out of things. And, you know, I go back to Dr. Madsen all the time, but like act yourself into a new way of thinking, that you just sometimes have to psych yourself out. I'm a person that hates singing in front of people. I'm a choral director. That is part of my job. And I hate it. And I'm better. I'm fine now. Like it's all well. But when I first started teaching, I was
Singing
terrified.
in front of a room of middle schoolers? Like, come on, they laugh at you the second you open your mouth.
And so what I tell my students is you're older than them. So no matter where your voice is, you're going to sound better than them. You're more mature. You have more training. You know more than they do. And no matter what, like and in my case, I'm not bigger than some of my students because I'm very short. But hopefully you're also bigger than them. But a lot of it is just you trying to kind of psych yourself out. And your colleagues, you have to use them and you have to vent to them because they're the only ones that truly know what it's like to be a teacher right now. And you also have to have things for yourself, some hobby or some outlet that you can have that's just yours, that has nothing to do with music and has nothing to do with teaching, because you also have to feed yourself. And I think that's hard because for any of us, you could work all day and still not be done. And it's really easy to just keep working, especially if your home is your office, is your rehearsal space, and that separation isn't there. And so I think that's, sorry, I'm getting a little preachy, but I just think that's really, really important to just have that other thing and to be able to say, I'm not checking my email on the weekend. I'm just not. And I'm done for the night. And I'm going to go watch Netflix, or I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to go for a run, but just have something that is completely unrelated to your career that you can have.
You're talking about all the good stuff. You're setting boundaries, finding something that you can refill your cup with, and being okay with taking the time to invest in something that you might not have expected that you would invest in. Erynn, I saw you taking some little notes over there. What are you going to add?
I am, because I forget things, and I'm a big writer downer of things. I don't have anything new to contribute to the conversation. Amy hit everything that I would have contributed. I totally just stand on all of those things that she said. The being nervous thing, there are sometimes I'm more of an introvert than I used to be, and there are sometimes I'm uncomfortable in front of classes. So I have a teaching persona, and Dr. Millard and Erynn are not the same person. And some days Erynn can't give my students what they need. And so, you know, Dr. Millard has some more separation, and it's almost there are some days where she can be something different. That's what the students need when Erynn doesn't have what it takes that day. I love what Amy is saying about leaning on the people in your profession. We are the only people in a building that do what we do. You know, in K-12, sometimes you're the only person, you're the only musician in the room. At the collegiate level, I'm the only choral person. So I still don't have anybody that I can talk to. It's when I come to the sessions that Amy puts together for all of us to get together and talk. It's all of the times that I call up Emmy or that I listen to her podcast. It's all the things that Coremore has done for me. That is what has gotten me through the last year. I would have been at a loss, but all of the great ideas that my friends have are all things I can try in my classroom and see which ones of those things work for me. And that's not just COVID times. I mean, that's period all of the time. Those are the times I love going to conferences and I love hearing all of the sessions, but the most my cup feels refilled is when I can talk to my friends and I can vent to people who understand what I'm going through. And people are like, you know, I went through that too. Have you thought about trying this? Read this book, listen to this podcast, watch this conductor, try this piece of music. I leave with more of those things that make me feel recharged. Don't be in a first or second year or somebody's like, my students need me every single day. I don't have time to go to the conference. Yes, you do. You need to go to that conference. You need to take time for yourself. Like Amy was saying, you need to meet other people who do what you do and have and can help you because the people in your building may not understand and may not be able to support you the way that you need.
I think asking is such a big part of this. You guys are both tapping on that. You're not in this by yourself. if nothing else, you have the three of us. I mean, you can shoot me an email anytime. I'd be happy to help. You're taking time now to fill your cup listening to this. And the becoming humble, and you don't have to figure it out on your own. Just like Amy asks people into class as guest lecturers, I've been recording a ton of guest lectures on different topics and using them as little podcast tips, but also throwing them in my class because that's one of the pillars of why this podcast started. I wanted my students to have a chance to meet all these wonderful people that I get to call friends and colleagues. And now they can, which is so helpful. You don't have to do it by yourself. So it is normal to be a little terrified. It is normal to be a little nervous, trying to figure things out. Classroom management and calling parents. So I asked, what do you think made the first couple weeks the hardest? And the first was building that rapport and getting them to buy in. I mean, no one had, kickball being played in their classroom like Amy, but there has been some people talking about how they didn't have a teacher before them, or they had someone who just gave them lyric sheets. So getting their trust, getting their buy-in and engagement, managing the behavior, and then how do you call parents? ? So those are some questions. Let's see where we go from here. Who wants to talk first?
It is hard to make the calls. And something that I have noticed about my students in the last couple of years is seeing how averse they are to conflict. Like they're just kind of not prepared to deal with it. And so that makes it to where they feel paralyzed even making the phone call. So some of the things that we do with them that I would encourage people to try. First thing is try to head these things off by making a good phone call first. If you kind of sense that you're going to go down the road with somebody that you might need to make some phone calls in the future, call home and say, hey, I just want to tell you how great your kid is today. And think about how much easier it might be when you have to make that more difficult phone call, that you have already laid the groundwork of showing the parent, hey, we're on the same side, and that is the side of your wonderful student. We're not on opposite sides here. Everybody's on the same side of that student. As something else that we do is I go in these Facebook groups that we're all a part of, and I look up lots of scenarios where people have, like I had an interaction with a parent today, and I put that up like at a NAFME meeting, and we talk about, okay, this is somebody's real life. If this was your real life, how would you deal with this today? And they get in little groups and they kind of talk it out. And then we go in the comments and see what some of the other things are that people suggested and see, okay, that seems like that would be a good idea. I'm not sure that that'd be right for me or my style or my classroom. And so you can never really be prepared for those moments, because when they happen, they're all very different and it can all feel very scary. But you can look at other people's scenarios and what it's been like. Try to work through some of those scenarios. Maybe there'll be some overlap. And then also, even when you're having a difficult time with a student, there's something wonderful about that student. Find it quick. If you can see that coming, and call home and say that wonderful thing first, and just remind the parent that you're all on the same side, and that is the side of your rock star student.
Beautifully said. Amy, anything you want to add?
The idea of making that connection first, so that your first connection is not necessarily something that's a challenge or negative, but I'm just reaching out. Especially I think when you start a new position, depending on how many students you're working with, that's a lot of parents. And so how do you, and of course you're always going to be compared to whomever was there before in whatever direction. And so especially if you do things in a different way than they're used to, I think part of it, just like with students, with parents, we want to manage expectations. And so I think communication is really important, and it's hard. Parents are very busy. So if I send emails or letters, it doesn't mean that they're actually going to read them either, to try to do that. But if there are ways you can reach out ahead of time, I think that I love the idea of looking at other events that have happened to other people to think through, because if you can think through ahead of time, what will I do in that situation? And, when I was teaching high school, it was my third year, and I had a fight in my classroom. And I was not prepared for that. It's not funny, but it was kind of funny. It was my freshman music theory class. And anyway, it was all over a boy, because this one girl, her boyfriend took his hat off and put it on this freshman girl's head. And the girlfriend, rather than being mad at the boyfriend, was mad at this freshman. So she decides to come into my classroom where the student was. So I have all these little baby freshmen, And this girl comes in who I knew, she was in another choir. And so it wasn't an unknown, but she came in with this pack of people. And it was actually a very scary situation for me. And I did what you're not supposed to do. And I got between the students. But it was one of those that, like, even if you'd asked me the day prior, oh, well, that would never, that's not with my students. That's not. And so being in that situation, I just kind of put myself between those students and my freshmen kind of behind me. But then the aftermath either of like, I can't get to the phone, the door's over there. How do I even tell someone that this is going on? And thankfully, security came and it broke up. But even the after, I was like, this is not, what is the procedure? Like, what
Right.
who do I have to talk to and what happens now and things like that, down to thinking ahead. What do I do if somebody's talking in my room? What do I do if all of a sudden somebody just starts mouthing off and will not sit down in my classroom? Thinking through, how do I handle that? One of the things I do say to my students is, the moment you have that position and you start talking with people, you find out exactly what the procedure is before something happens. What happens if I have to send a kid out? Is there a warning system in place? What is the expectation? If I have to call home, do I call home? Do I speak to the principal first? Do I, just knowing ahead of time so that it doesn't happen. And then I go, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. You at least know in that building, this is the expectation. This is the routine. This is what happens. I also really encourage my students, the moment something happens, or if I'm going to call home or whatever, I'm immediately calling my administration so they're in the loop. So that I have somebody that is in the know. And if I'm meeting with a student, to have another adult in the room. It doesn't need to be a music person. It can be whomever, and it doesn't need to be an administrator, but so that there's another adult in the room for a lot of reasons. Not only just so that there's a witness of this is what happened. And so I think, thinking ahead of what can I think through ahead of time. And then if something happens, then figuring out what to do. But I think it is intimidating. And I think sometimes, we do have those parents where their child can do no wrong. And I think, that can be intimidating too. But I think, what Erynn was saying about reaching out ahead of time or talking about the positive and not just saying, well, this is their problem. And, and talking to the kid. I think sometimes we don't think to do that. And maybe a simple conversation afterwards,
Afterwards is so key. Not in front of the rest of the room.
Yeah, don't zap them. But really just having that conversation, because maybe that kid's just having a bad day or something happened that we don't know about. And, that's it. And so I think just, thinking through, but also knowing what the guidance is within your building of what do I do when something like that happens.
We do a project in elementary and secondary where you write up your why statement. Why are you a music teacher? And you prepare your little blurb for parent teacher night or open house or whatever you call it, so that you're portraying this positive statement of, this is why I exist for your students, for your kids. I exist for this. And they're going to walk out of my classroom with that. And having that to lean on, but then also having to do this, to do my why and accomplish these goals for your children. These are my classroom expectations, and this is how, so that's all part of their big final project. Is this, one of the projects. But it's so interesting to hear, they're like, wait, I never thought of that. Or when you have them write a behavior rubric and all the pieces that go into a behavior rubric, and just taking the time to think, what, then what, then what, then what, then what. Those are so important. And you've mentioned so many things that have addressed, yes, this is normal. Yes, nerves will happen. Yes, it's a little terrifying when you don't know what's going to happen. But every experience is one you can learn and grow from. I had a fight right outside my classroom, my second year, right outside the door. For the people that are teaching the little ones, I just want to say, if you have a kid vomit or pee in your classroom, it's okay. It's part of the storyline. I had a kid pee the whole walk to her spot. So we had to all evacuate, and the carpet had to get changed because she just peed the whole way. And then the thrower uppers, at least it wasn't projectile. I think that's also really key. If you have the little ones, there's so many more adventurous things that you can wrap your head around. But if you're looking at it as a learning experience instead of I failed, giving yourself grace, going back to that comment.
I will also add, that have the conversation with your choir before of, what do I do if I don't feel well on the risers?
Oh, yes.
So that they know ahead of time, don't be the savior, sit immediately. And if I'm next to that person, don't try to hold them up. It's totally fine, but don't wait until somebody goes down. I had it in the concert, the last song, the last page, a kid passed out. And it was like, oh my gosh, we kind of kept going and then kind of ended it, but it was literally the end of the concert. So then the audience is like, do we clap? Do we not? Like, what's going? It was the most awkward situation. And it just kind of, that was it. And there was no applause. There was no bowing. The kid was fine. It was fine. But I have had that happen many times. And so I try to make a point to say, I'm going to say this. And so if this happens, help each other, but this is what you do, because, if it happens and you forgot to say something, that can be problematic.
These are all such good. You've hit on almost everything. Let's end on a positive note. Not that all this has not been positive, but let's end on a really positive note. So the students didn't choose choir, but the administration has asked for a list of people who might potentially choose choir, but you're new. How do you recruit for your first ever, after school 4th and 5th grade choir all the way up through that high school group? What are your suggestions for that real fast?
I would try to be as visible as possible. So I would be going into all the classrooms, talk to the teachers to see if that's okay, or go into, when they have lunch, or any way that you can have access to students, to introduce yourself, talk about some of the fun things about singing, about choir, why they might want to do that. Because I think if the person is a little bit known, at least, that's a step in the right direction. And if there are kids that are interested, that you've kind of made, even if it's, I met them and they smiled at me and we might have a rapport, do they have friends? And say,
Bring your friend.
I had a friend that she used to, during like hall passing, would stand outside her classroom and she would just randomly be like, hey, how's it going? So I'm Miss So-and-so. Do you like to sing? And she would just kind of talk to people, and she would also get to know her students' friends. So she knew them by name. She would talk to them, not just always recruiting, but just get to know them. And then if she, a few months down the road was like, so what do you think? All of a sudden it was like, oh, I like her. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll try this choir thing. But I would just try to be out there and visible and make connections.
I agree with what Amy is saying completely. Just being visible and making sure. Sometimes like years go by and people are like, oh, I didn't even know we had this here. So that just little thing about being visible, can you put a little snippet on the morning announcements of whatever competition you were at, or whatever is going on in your class, and just let people know this is what it would be like to be in choir, at any age. I also love what she's saying about, hey, do you have any friends? This is where I think it really is important about how you make people feel, because it's not even just sort of about the choral experience, but if you make people feel good and they cannot wait to get to choir, then they're going to start bringing their friends in. And it's not even just like the friends of the people that sing for you. Do you have good relationships with your colleagues? When I was teaching high school, the number of times another teacher would bring a student down to my room, and I didn't know the student, I knew the teacher, I was friends with the teacher, and they're like, hey, this one can sing, I'm bringing them down, they're going to sing for you right now. The number of students that I got that way, I would recruit anybody and everyone. If the students that were assistants in guidance had to bring a guidance pass out in my classroom, like, thank you so much for waiting until we finished. Do you sing? Have you ever thought about trying? I'll recruit anybody. So I love what Amy was saying about the visibility and about reaching out to all of the friends.
I love this. I hope this has given people ideas. I know that we could talk about this for a long time, so be warned. The two of you are going to be asked to come back on when I do another one of these at some point, because this is one of my favorite topics, and it's another one of the big pillars, is helping those teachers that feel burnt out to refill their cup, or those teachers that, as it happened twice in these little conversations, are terrified. It doesn't have to be scary. It really can be fun. What's the one thing that you really want the listener to walk away from today with, if you had one thing you wanted them to remember? You want to go first, Erynn?
Sure. For me, I would like to hit home again the thing about having your cohort of people. Maybe it's a tight cohort of people you went to school with, or maybe you live somewhere else now and it's a new cohort of people that you've met that do what you do. But I can't say, for me personally, how important that has been. I live in the middle of the country now, and I have never lived in this area before. So having the cohort of people that I talk to, that I went to school with, hey, this is my situation. Some days I just need to vent, and some days I need ideas. And then meeting the new people around here and finding a little bit more about, this is how things work out here. And hey, this might be something that you're missing. It's a little bit different here. Those relationships are so important. And please don't tell yourself that you don't have time to go to conferences. You don't have time to interact with your friends that do what you do for a living, because those are the things that really can just save you. It could be the idea that you need. It could be the affirmation you need. It could be the shoulder that you need to cry on. So please don't forget to prioritize those in what you're doing every day.
Yeah, and I would just bounce off of that you have to prioritize yourself, because you can't fully be there for your students with what they need if you don't have enough for yourself. So I think having those relationships and those people that you can lean on, both professionally and personally. My husband is a non-musician. And I mean, he did play trumpet, but like a long time ago, and he appreciates and he's very supportive. But oh my gosh, the man just listens to me vent and complain and like go through things. And in some ways it's better, because he's not trying to fix things because he doesn't necessarily know how in my field, but he's just listening. And so I think there's a lot of value of talking to your friends and the people in your life that, and be friends with non-musicians. It's wonderful to have other things to talk about. And protecting, I think that time for yourself. I started reading over the break, and I love to read, but I do not make time for it. But I have found that in the evening, especially like towards bedtime, if I just sit and read for 20 minutes, I'm so much calmer. I sleep better. It helps me focus on something else, because my brain at night goes, and I think of all the things, especially with work, that I could be doing and things like that. So having, I think, a distressor and an outlet is really important. That if you can do things for yourself, including the professional development Erynn talked about, you have to remember why you got into this. We were talking with our undergrads today, our freshmen and sophomores who aren't in the fun classes yet. And so we're trying to do activities that relate to being a choral music ed major. And we're doing some watch parties with the virtual conference in March, and we're having a alumni thing, and we're having some other things happen to remember, like, right, I'm doing this thing that I really want to do, even if I'm not really in the classes for that yet. So I think remembering why you're doing this in the first place, leaning on your people, but having stuff for yourself too, so that you can be there the way you want to be for your students.
These are great words of wisdom. Don't give up. Don't walk away. Fill your cup. You're already doing that because you're listening to a podcast and getting ideas. Good job. There is so much to say. I'm reading a book right now, speaking of which. I just started reading. I'm about halfway through, but it's called Bulletproof, and it's by an ex-Secret Service agent, Evie Pamparus, and it talks about building mental strength and thinking through every possible outcome. Great storyteller, but the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking, man, this would be so good for those first-year teachers that are still just trying to figure out how your brain works outside the box of just eat, sleep, drink music. And learning how, we're in the music profession, but we're really in the people profession. And that has to be your new focus. So I'm so thankful that you two were willing to give up some time on this beautiful afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. This has been awesome.
All right, what do you think? Was that fun to listen to? Did it bring back memories to all of those teachers out there that are veterans? Or did it give you some ideas and offer you some clarity and some hope? Please let me know. I would love to hear from you. I think this whole doctors are in thing is going to occur again in the future. So please tell me, what do you want to hear more of? You can always join the conversation over at patreon.com/musicedmatters, or go to emilybirch.org/contact and shoot me some information so I can best fill your cup. You have successfully listened to some professional development, which means you are doing great. So in case no one told you today, you really matter. We all know that music matters, whether it's your first day in the classroom or your 58th year. And I will see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.